Welcome to the Mountain Bike Coaching Podcast, Donuts and Bikes. I'm Kristian.
And I'm Paul.
And we're here to discuss the techniques and skills we use to progress our coaches, our riders, and ourselves to be more confident, competent, unlock performance, and have more fun on our mountain bikes.
Hey, everyone. Welcome to our preview episode. Here we're going to give you, our listeners, a sense of what this podcast is all about, how it works, who it's for, and who we are, your hosts. So first, I'd like to introduce you to my good friend and co-host, Paul Howard. Paul is owner and head coach of the Whistler-based ZEP mountain bike camps and co-founder of the Professional Mountain Bike Instructor Association. He's been riding and coaching for at least 1 billion years and has a great family and loves donuts. Paul, what did I miss that the listeners should know about you?
Hey, man. I'll try and keep it short and sweet. Grew up in the UK, started riding in the early 90s, mountain biking, and did some riding and racing. And I started coaching late 90s in North Carolina, running a mountain bike school there. And that's really where I cut my teeth, just designing programs, teaching a lot, training instructors, and then moved to Whistler when I graduated from university in early 2000s and started ZEP. And really just the whole goal with ZEP was just to try and bring a new level of coaching to the mountain bike world. And we started the PMBI instructor courses as part of ZEP. And then that sort of blew up around the world. And basically been doing those two things ever since. I teach snowboarding in the winter. I train snowboard instructors in the winter as well. And really that's, in a nutshell, the last 20 years of my career is riding mountain bike programs and training mountain bike instructors and teaching snowboarding and training snowboard instructors. And that's me, that's my passion, that's my career. And I'm excited to dig into this podcast and share more with the listeners. And what about you, Kristian? Why don't you give us a few bio points and tell our listeners about your wonderful self?
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, I grew up riding BMX bikes in the 80s and fortunately found mountain bikes in the 90s and was very, very excited to get on that kind of bike. And soon after that, started guiding for high school here in North Carolina and saw the benefits of taking people into the woods on bikes and got really turned on to that process and continued that through the North Carolina Outward Bound School, guiding expeditions on bikes. And that led to teaching at the Appalachian State University, where I'm currently a senior lecturer there. Along the way, I discovered the PMBIA that we've been talking about and have become a course conductor, currently a course conductor mentor on the tech team and a certified level 4 coach. Additionally, I am the trail boss at Rocky Knob Park in Boone, where I lead a dedicated group of volunteers to steward our wonderful trail system here.
Awesome. Nice. And I think if our listeners want to find out any more about us, I'm sure they can with a bit of Googling or checking out our websites. But I'm English, I don't really like talking about myself too much. It just feels a bit awkward. So, it's good just to have some quick intro points for our listeners. And maybe if we dig into kind of why we're doing this podcast, who's it for and how we're doing it. I guess, Kristian, if I start with a why, and feel free to dig in. But for me, I feel like, at ZEP in Whistler and Kelowna every year, like we train hundreds of riders, like kids, youth, adults. In the PMBI Association, we're training, thousands of instructors, nearly 2,000 instructors every year all over the world. And for me, it's wonderful, but I feel like we could reach more riders. We could reach more coaches. And for me, I've really discovered lately kind of the value of podcasts. Like I'm listening to them like in the car, cooking dinner, like cleaning my bike, driving to work, even like working out. I'm listening to podcasts. And for me, it was kind of like, why are we doing this? And I'm like, podcast could be a great way to just help educate riders not only on how to ride better, but how to approach learning and skill progression in general. And we can kind of do that and reach more riders through the podcast, hopefully. And I think the other goal is just for us in this podcast is raising the awareness of mountain bike skills coaching and trying to provide a resource worldwide for coaches and riders to continue their development, their skill development, or if you're a coach, kind of your professional teaching development. And I think a big passion for both of us is just pushing the coaching of this sport forward. You know, that's what we've always been doing. That's what I've been doing in my background with ZEP and PNBIA, is trying to make skills coaching more professional, more consistent, based on like real world experience, biomechanics and physics, and not just sort of some guy's opinion that they then try and train everyone the same way they ride, you know, like trying to objectify it, break it down, analyze it so it makes sense. And so that's a big goal behind this podcast, is to sort of share that information, hopefully with more riders and more coaches. And hopefully through this, we can create a resource to continue, building and supporting the sport and getting more bums on bikes, basically, and more coaches helping to get more bums on bikes. I guess they're the big whys. Anything to add to that, Kristian, or move on to the how?
For sure, Paul. I think that, you know, over the decade of working with you, we seem to have all these conversations about the technical parts of coaching, and these conversations just seem to expand and expand. And there's a lot to discuss here. So it seemed natural when we started talking about this idea of a podcast that kind of joining forces to draw out our ideas here and engage folks would work really well.
Yeah, I love that, because it's almost like it was almost like a running joke where like we'd be talking about things and then we'd be like, we should do a podcast on that. And then
right.
It just got to a point where it's like, you know what? Maybe we should do a podcast. Like,
yeah, and I think it's important for our listeners to hear that. Like, this has been a passion project idea for us, and here we are in December of 22, and we started recording in September this year. And
yeah, I think so.
Yeah, it's been a process, and I think it reminds me a lot of you know, how we learn anything, any skill, you know, mountain biking or otherwise, of jumping into this podcast and trying to figure out as we go.
Yeah,
and I think it's important for our listeners to hear that. That's, you know, a big reason for us to do this beyond, Paul, the ideas that you shared here. Is this is a way to kind of push ourselves a bit and to see how we can take concepts, explore them quite deeply, and then make them relevant to our coaches and riders that are our listeners.
Yeah.
And so how this is going to work really is that, you know, Paul and I are going to pick some ideas, pick some concepts, and we discuss these kind of back and forth. We text about them, we email about them, and just kind of have consolidated around, you know, a handful of ideas here in our first series of episodes that we thought were interesting for us as individual coaches and riders, and thought that this would be some really good ground to cover for other folks that are coaching and perhaps wanting to push themselves into their own next level of coaching.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for listening to the Mountain Bike Coaching Podcast. I hope you're enjoying this episode. You can find this podcast on Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, and Spotify.
You can also find us on Instagram at Donuts and Bikes. Please like, comment, and share. And of course, please share this with your friends to help us spread the word. Back to the episode.
Anything else that our listeners need to know with how our podcast is working, Kristian?
Yeah, I think some insight into that is in the name, Donuts and Bikes.
Mm-hmm.
Each episode, in addition to getting deep with theory and skills and bikes, we're going to feature a favorite donut for our listeners to try to find.
Is that can you tell us about the donut theory that we've come up with? Tell our listeners about the donut theory. Just quick.
I really think that should be reason enough to listen to the first episode.
Okay. It's all in the first episode. Sweet. I like it. Selling the first episode already. Perfect. What we've tried to do in this first, I guess, season or chapter of 4 or 5 episodes is just for our listeners, like, we're trying to not pre-screen or like script things too much. We kind of come up with literally a couple of text messages between Kristian and I of like, let's chat about this, maybe here's some points, and then really essentially just wing it, for lack of a better term. So we're trying to create these podcasts to sort of be organic conversations and not something that's sort of highly polished or super scripted. So that will definitely, I'm sure, come across in these first few episodes. Like Kristian said, we're good at riding bikes and coaching, and we are at the processing phase of how to do podcasts. Yeah, we're no experts at that, but we're figuring it out, and hopefully listeners can relate to that and still enjoy what we put out.
Yeah, totally. So, Paul, who this podcast is for, we're aiming this at coaches and riders that are truly interested in skill development, right? And so pushing themselves to further their own knowledge, their own information, education with how they ride bikes and how they coach folks on bikes. So we're trying to bring our own experiences, over 20 plus years each of instruction and coaching to this modern community. And I think that, to me, that's the passion that I sense in this, beyond just the learning of how to do this, working with you, is that sensing that there is a growing community of coaches. And I think that needs to be recognized and celebrated, and have these coaches should have opportunities to get as much as they can in a variety of places. And I think that's what I'm hoping to get out of this podcast, to see that coaching community grow even more.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think sort of to match that too, it's like there's a growing awareness and community of just skills development in mountain biking. Like the idea of like a mountain bike lesson, it's still not where it could be, but it's way bigger than it ever has been. And I think that sort of that ridership, if they're going online or they're looking for coaching, they're looking for camps, the riders are out there a lot more aware of like, how can I get better at riding a bike? Like, how can I develop my skills? And that community is growing. And obviously because of that, like you say, the coaching community is growing, and hopefully we can look after those two communities and help riders get better and help coaches get better through this passion project that we're currently winging it. But as we go, I'm sure we'll get more polished and get more dialed.
For sure. And I think that we've got 4 episodes recorded, and we'll be publishing them shortly. Part of this idea of developing community is, if listeners out there have ideas for us to dive into, people to talk to, this is the opportunity then to continue to build that community, and want to make this a two-way street.
Absolutely. Yeah. By all means, let us know. Send us a message or whatever, and let us know ideas for topics or guests. That'd be great. And I mean, and on that note, like in this first chapter, we are bringing in Shannon Rademacher from Australia, and that's something we want to continue to do, is interview coaches and riders and industry people from around the world, obviously with a focus on skills progression and focus on coaching. But we're excited for that, to get more guests onto the podcast as well.
Cool. Paul, where can people find us on the socials?
They can find us on the old interweb. The website is the mountainbikecoachingpodcast.buzzsprout.com. Obviously on Instagram, it's just at Donuts and Bikes. And then the podcast itself is on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, obviously, and then Amazon Music. And they're the best places to find us right now. So if you want to shoot us a message, probably Instagram's best. You can just comment there or shoot us a message on Instagram. But otherwise, dig into Apple, Spotify, or Amazon Music for our podcast.
Sweet. Thanks, everybody, for listening. Stay safe out there. Ride smart. Drop us a line if you got any ideas or questions, and we'll see you on the trail.